Hi everyone. So today I'm just going to give a quick overview of the results of the UNICEF Global Solar Powered Water System Assessment, which was completed last year. UNICEF's currently doing water supply programming in about 100 different countries at the moment, and around half of them are implementing solar powered water system programs at scale. And these form a really important part of UNICEF's WASH climate resilience agenda. And the majority of the systems are being installed in rural, relatively isolated off-grid communities. And as such, they're relatively small in size, usually supporting less than 2,000 people. And we're also installing them in healthcare centres and schools. So the main aim of the assessment was to basically take stock of the progress so far and learn from in-country experiences, and the focus was less on the technology side of things because we felt like that had already been done, but instead we wanted to focus more on the programming side of things, particularly in terms of sustainability and community management models, etc. So there were three main components to the assessment. Firstly, we carried out a review of all the research that was out there already. We also carried out a survey amongst 500 of our WASH staff to learn more about their experiences with the technology. And finally, we carried out 4 field missions to Nigeria, Mauritania, Uganda and Myanmar, where we spoke to hundreds of partners and visited systems also. And these countries were chosen basically because they all had very different physical, economic and political environments. So the results of the assessment: on the demand side, we found that the systems were extremely popular with communities, the government, private sector. Everyone seemed to love them. But for governments in particular, one of the limiting factors was the actual cost of the system was still higher than obviously hand pumps and diesel generator based systems. So this was one of the inhibiting factors, stopping them from taking solar powered water systems to scale in several cases. But unfortunately this was also because they weren't factoring in the long-term savings of switching to solar, and this is something UNICEF and other partners can really help advocate for, changing the way that we look at the costing of these systems. In terms of durability, the assessment found that solar powered water systems were in fact much more durable than hand pumps and diesel generator systems, but the boreholes did have to be well sited and the systems had to be correctly installed and dimensioned in order for them to be more sustainable. But as you can see from the figures here, the majority of systems, if they broke down, the issues were relatively minor, but they did tend to take a long time to fix. And this was because local capacity was often limited, and it was also difficult to access spare parts in remote locations. It was also interesting to note that vandalism and theft is less of an issue than it used to be. This might be perhaps now because I know at UNICEF we're protecting our systems a lot better than we did before, but it's also probably because the value of solar panels has decreased compared to how expensive they used to be originally. So in terms of seasonality, the majority of systems were found to provide sufficient water for most of the year. However, we did find that about 53% of the systems did experience an issue with seasonality, which we define as the systems being unable to provide sufficient water to meet demand for about 1 to 7 days per year. We did find that 6% of systems did struggle more than 1 week per year, but this was found mostly to be due to poor dimensioning and borehole siting, and obviously improving the dimensioning of systems to get most out of it, even when the sun isn't shining, is one of the best ways to overcome issues with seasonality. And also having either a backup generator or another improved source that communities can use if sunlight isn't sufficient. And I will say here, Grundfos and Lorentz and some of the other manufacturers have really great online sizing tools that can really help with project planning. So I would encourage people to try and check those out if you can. In terms of operation and maintenance, for the most part, the systems were being fully managed by communities, particularly after the warranty period had expired, which was usually 1 to 2 years. We found that the successful collection of user fees was absolutely essential in order to ensure the long-term sustainability of these systems. So we did find actually where this worked best, there was some kind of technology involved, whether it was mobile phone technology or smart taps, where people would use fobs and top them up at kiosks, etc. We found that this was really important in terms of financial management and accountability, but also in terms of people's willingness to pay. Because the system was much more efficient, it was also more trustworthy in the eyes of households, so they were more likely to pay for the services. And we found that for solar in general, in fact, households were in fact more likely to pay than they were for hand pumps, for example, because the higher level of service that was offered to households was much more desirable. One major issue we did find was the introduction of user fees, which of course is really vital for the sustainability of the systems. It had the potential to exclude the poorest households in some cases. And I think there's often the assumption that community-based models will automatically take care of the poorest people if we just leave it up to the community. But in actual fact, this is not the case all the time, and we found that in at least 50% of cases, the poorest households were often excluded. So in these cases, it's really important that either the government or UNICEF or the partners kind of intervene and make sure a proper system is in place to protect the poorest. And obviously this is much easier to do when you have mobile phone technology and smart taps, because you can preload credit each month for the poorest families. So in terms of professionalisation and capacity, perhaps unsurprisingly, we found that the most common severe causes of malfunction, as mentioned before, were related to borehole siting and construction. We often found that existing boreholes were not properly selected. There wasn't enough hydrogeological testing going on with existing boreholes. So of course this is something that needs to change. Staff at all levels lack sufficient training, particularly in terms of operation and maintenance, overseeing construction, this type of thing. And also operation and maintenance plans didn't exist for the majority of communities, so this is something that needed to be improved upon. And I think it's important to note here that many of the issues around the professionalisation and sustainability are not just limited to solar powered water systems. They're an issue, for the water sector as a whole. But I think because the investment in solar powered water systems is higher than a hand pump, for example, it's even more important that we get this right, so that we don't waste the investment. So in conclusion, we found that overall solar powered water systems are excellent in terms of their flow rate, their durability, but sunlight does have to be plentiful, boreholes do have to be well sited, and systems do have to be correctly dimensioned if we're going to get the most out of these systems. Aside from the obvious environmental benefits, the systems do allow a higher level of service to communities. This leads to a lot of time saving and improved economic opportunities for the community, and it also means they're more willing to pay. But it's really important that some kind of mechanism is put in place for the poorest people so they're not left behind. And finally, it's really important that more investment is put into improving staff capacity at all levels, particularly within the government and the private sector. And local markets also need to be strengthened, particularly in remote rural areas, so that there's a continuous availability of quality spare parts and technicians available also. Thank you.